Good evening. Tonight we're going to be using a worksheet that hopefully you picked up when you walked in. If you didn't, there still should be some back there. Feel free to grab one. This year in our quarterly group Bible studies, we have been focused on the idea of practical application of love in a church. And our goal is to be what some of you have heard me describe as a high-functioning church. And what that means is, fundamentally, the purpose of God's body is to help each other get to heaven. That's why the body exists. That's what we're here for. And as you evaluate what you do amongst the body and how the body benefits you, you should see the body as a blessing from God that helps you get to heaven and to serve. And I'd encourage you to think a bit introspectively and to say that if your experience is not that the body is helping you get to heaven, you need to do some evaluation on yourself, maybe the group you're with, things that need to be improved. And similarly, if you can't point to ways or see ways that you're helping other members of the body get to heaven, you likely need to evaluate that also. We receive, as Barry mentioned this morning, we receive both a right or a privilege from being in the family, but with that, we also gain responsibility that we're supposed to provide. And so we need to evaluate ourselves on both sides of that. If we aren't doing that, if the church is not helping each of us to serve the Lord better and isn't focused on getting more people to heaven, that fundamentally means that our group is a social club or a country club that's meant to spend time together, enjoy one another, but isn't necessarily different than a Lions Club or a Kiwanis Club or a Rotary Club. All of those people get together and join together often to do good things. If you go and you're a part of those groups, you know people in them, they do lots of great work. They support one another when there are struggles with members of the group. They do good things. They help each other be better people. But our purpose here is not just that we're seeking to be better people. I think it was Evan did an invitation while I was away a week or two ago, and the question that Crystal relayed to me that he asked was, if Jesus wasn't in your life, would your life be different? Or would you still just be a good person? And so as we evaluate our interaction as a group, if our idea is that the body is providing for us socially, it's giving us a group to belong to, if that's what our focus is, that means we are approaching the body differently than what God intended. So to that end, and thinking about practical applications of love in a church, our quarterly group Bible studies yesterday focused on the idea of bearing one another's burdens. And so we looked at two passages. Hopefully you were able to take part in those or study on your own. Two passages, one from Galatians 6, the other from 1 Thessalonians 5. And so I want to give you a moment or two to jot down a couple notes of things that stuck with you from your study yesterday, and then I'm going to ask for you to share those. And this is where I'll remind you that just because you said something in your group yesterday, that was 1/3 of the group, if everyone was attending a meeting. So 2/3 of the group didn't hear your great point. Alternatively, if you heard a great point and you'd like to plagiarize it, 2/3 of the group doesn't know that you didn't say that in your group yesterday. So now's your time to shine. But yeah, the question I want you to consider is, what sticks out to you as important when you reflect on those two passages and our study yesterday about bearing burdens with each other? Let's take a couple minutes. What stuck with you from these two passages in our studies yesterday about bearing each other's burdens? Crystal?
You said yesterday from the Galatians passage that I'm responsible for salvation, but also for ours.
Yeah, so in case you didn't hear Crystal, and she gave credit, I said this yesterday, and she gave me credit. That was nice. that from the Galatians passage, we're told to bear one another's burdens, but then we're also told that we are our responsibility. And so I think a way to consider that is that when I am facing judgment, I will be held accountable for my soul. I won't be held accountable for the way someone else handled my soul. I will be held accountable for that. But I will be held accountable for how I helped my brother and his soul. And so we are given responsibility for one another's souls in a way that should be a bit sobering, that we have responsibility towards one another and how we handle ourselves. Great. What else? Mara? Yeah, so in that idea of restoring a brother, this isn't when it's convenient for you, or if you would like to, or when you have extra spare time. That's not how commandments are handled. That's not what the law of Christ, how we should treat it. And so this isn't some optional thing that we do on our free time or when it's convenient. Instead, we need to view it as impactful. It is impactful to my salvation how I seek to restore my brother's soul. Great. Ms. Mayberry.
It's not enough to know what God wants from us. We have to act on it too. Like the lawyer knows all the laws, but he still is saying, what do I need to do? So it requires action, not just knowing.
Yeah, so there's a distinct difference between knowledge and action, and both are required for us to live righteously. We'll talk some more about the Good Samaritan later this evening if we have time, but in that story, the lawyer sought to justify himself, essentially saying, like, I know the law, and then highlighted all the things that he wasn't doing as a part of the law, and so his actions were falling short of his knowledge. Great. What else? Somebody from over here. Chip was looking down, and then he saw me pointing over here. Go ahead, Chip.
So in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, when we get to that section, I wasn't in 1 Thessalonians, when we get to that section, starting in verse 12, starting in verse 14, we urge you, brothers and sisters, to admonish, not to really encourage, to make our help, to be patient with everyone. See that no one repays evil with evil, but always seek what is good for one. What I highlighted yesterday in the comment was that verses 12 through 13 have something to do with our relationship to the leadership or to those who work in the church. So how do we encourage those who work? Which implies sometimes work can be a burden.
Yeah.
And so we can help those who are working hard in the church, not just the elders, but anyone who's doing work in the church. The second section is verses 14 through 16, which talks about members to members. Sometimes encouraging the faint-hearted and admonishing the unruly and helping the weak and being patient with everyone and seeking what is good for one another and all people can be a burden. Because we have others in mind, like you said, your remark yesterday. We do bear a responsibility to others, relationship to God. And so that can be a burden. And then the last section is about our relationship with God, but I will point that out. And what I wanted to look at was in 2 Corinthians chapter 11. That's where I was, sorry, that's where I was first. But in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, when Paul is writing about the things that he's gone through in his life, his trials, all the things, the shipwrecks, being stoned, and all the things that happened, he ends that whole section by saying in verse 28, apart from such external things, there's the daily pressure on me of concern for all the churches. And I think what that says to me, coupled with the comment I just made about our looking out for each other, is that daily we are, and probably should be, concerned with each other.
Yes, so I had written down Chip's comment from yesterday about relationship especially, because it highlights that we have leaders. We are blessed with leaders. Hopefully, we're going to appoint some more leaders to be blessed further. But as members, we are not without responsibility in regard to that leadership, that we are called to encourage them to serve. Or you might say we're called to lighten the load of the servant, that service is a burden. That's okay. That's not to discount or disparage ideas of service, but it is to say when you see someone laboring, and especially if they are laboring diligently, they likely have a burden that you can lighten for them. Or you can evaluate some of your behavior and determine, are you lightening or burdening them further? I especially think this is true in our relationships with the elders. They have a lot of concerns to deal with. And part of being unified and peaceable and loving is seeking peace and not seeking rancor. And if you want to lighten the load of the elders, seek peace whenever you can. Don't cause strife, seek peace. And as we appoint new deacons, and there are men who are called to serve in certain ways, don't be a problem finder, be a problem solver for them where you can. Lighten whatever burden that you can bring to them, because they're going to have plenty of burden to bear without us, dishing more onto it. What else? Anything else that stuck with you from yesterday?
I think we talked about being mindful that when we're restoring someone in love, that we are mindful that we don't put ourselves in the position of I'm better than that person, or I would never have sinned like that, or it was something that how could they have done that? That's because we need to be mindful of our own temptation, what causes others.
Yeah, so the Galatians 6 passage especially deals with this idea that when you're restoring a brother, you may be tempted to go, well, I never had problems with that. That's not my sin. And that may be true. Like we all deal with different temptations and different sin. And so ensuring that when we are restoring a brother, we aren't called to highlight where we exceed them in righteousness while also maybe forgetting the places where we need help to be restored as well. That haughtiness of spirit won't benefit the group if that's the way we approach our brother's sins. That's not how we can actually restore one another. If we do it with a chip on our shoulder that, oh, Barry, let me help you get better. You should be more like me. Well, that's not the idea here. And the temptation, especially I think, or I have seen, has been that the more visible someone's sin is, their chosen temptation, if you'll kind of let me say that, if it's a more visible sin, it is much easier for us to do that and to ignore our own personal sin in comparison, because our temptation is closeted or done in the dark or only in my rudeness or mistreatment of my wife. No one else sees that in our home, and so no one else knows that I have that issue. We're called to seek to restore and be humble in doing that, so that we don't fall into sin as well. Emily?
Yeah, one of the things that was brought up yesterday was the idea of what is encouragement, and because oftentimes we think about it as this wow, you led singing, that's really encouraging, or or something that is, and there is a place for that, and there is that level of it, but that it can look like different things at different times. In the First Thessalonians passage, it talks about admonishing and idle, encouraging the faint-hearted, and the weak. There's three different things for three different types of people. And so encouraging a brother would be like making them break to do, so it's not just, here, let me give you the answer of, you're having this problem, and I've had that problem before, I have a Bible, and I know the right answer, so there you go, problem solved.
Go cash in the right answer, it'll solve the problem.
Yeah, no, instead it's more of a, let's make you break so you can do the right thing, because they need to go through the process of, struggling through that, that's the growth. It's not about it's about struggling
Right, and you can see those ideas, whether it's 1 Peter 1, that we're refined as fire, James chapter 1, when we deal with struggle, the benefits that we gain, the strength we gain from surviving trial. All of those ideas, I think, are great in that when we are bearing one another's burdens, we're not trying to take the burden away, especially the burdens related to sin. We are seeking to strengthen our brethren so that they can survive the struggle and the burden and come out stronger for it. I also like one of the comments Emily made around there's 3 different things that you see in 1 Thessalonians 5, whether it's faint or the idol or whatever, and that they each get a different prescription. If you see that as a doctor's prescription, you don't admonish the weak. You encourage the weak. There may be some admonishment in there, but making certain that we aren't applying the same treatment to every burden and kind of approaching things bluntly can help us aid our brethren better. Barry, you look like you had a thought. No?
Just enjoying what you're saying.
Okay, good. All right. I also, in the 1 Thessalonians 5 passage, and then we'll move on to these stories. One other item about the encouragement is that the encouragement is not that this is going to end. The way we encourage our brethren is not to tell them, well, this will be over soon. Or everybody goes through this. Or that's not what he tells us that the encouragement is in 1 Thessalonians 5. What's the encouragement? What are the encouraging words that we're supposed to share?
That God has destined us for salvation.
Yes. God has destined us for salvation and not wrath. God wants to see us saved. And we need to encourage one another in that way when we're struggling with sin, maybe when we feel disciplined, that we're encouraging one another that maybe you are facing the discipline of the Lord. And good fathers discipline their sons, as we see in Hebrews 12. And that he disciplines us so that we can attain to righteousness and to eternal life. He does not desire wrath for us. He desires hope and salvation. And that's the encouragement that we need to give our brethren. Anything else before we go on? All right, so we're going to look at 3 stories. We may only look at 2 if we don't have time, but we're going to look at 3 stories. One of them we talked about in the adult class this morning, so we're going to save it to the end in case we run out of time. The other 2 I want us to use as a lens to look at the idea of bearing one another's burden through so that we can help illuminate and clarify what it looks like to bear each other's burdens. So first we'll look at Mark chapter 2, when Jesus heals the paralytic. I'll read that. If you would like to turn there in your Bible, you're welcome to. Or you can just listen to me read once I get there. Mark chapter 2. And when he returned to Capernaum after some days, it was reported that he was at home. And many were gathered together so that there was no more room, not even at the door. And he was preaching the word to them. And they came, bringing to him a paralytic carried by 4 men. And when they could not get near him because of the crowd, they removed the roof above him. And when they had made an opening, they let down the bed on which the paralytic lay. And when Jesus saw their fear, he said to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Now some of the scribes were sitting there questioning in their hearts, "Why does this man speak like that? He is blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone?" And immediately Jesus, perceiving in his spirit that they questioned within themselves, said to them, "Why do you question these things in your heart? Which is easier to say to the paralytic, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Rise up, take your bed and walk'? But that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins," he said to the paralytic, "I say to you, rise, pick up your bed, and go home." And he rose and immediately picked up his bed and went out before them all, so that they were all amazed and glorified God, saying, "We never saw anything like this." So make a note or two about ways that this story can help us understand the idea of bearing one another's burdens. All right, how does this help us understand ideas of bearing each other's burdens? Megan.
I've always found this story very interesting. When Jesus says when he saw their faith, he forgave his sin. And I've always thought that was so interesting because you really think about forgiveness as more of a, I personally have to ask for it and to receive it. And of course, in John we're told that we can pray for a sin that doesn't lead to death for one of our brothers or sisters and God will forgive them. And so I think that almost kind of backs up exactly what happens here, this idea that these men or women, whoever they were, cared so much about their friend that they were willing to risk getting arrested for tearing somebody's roof apart, actually being scolded by Jesus. Because what if they lowered him down and Jesus was like, "Whoa, this was not the right way to do this. I'm not doing this for your friend."
Have some decorum.
Yeah, and so they were really willing to risk
Yeah.
a lot just to get their friend in front of Jesus because they had so much faith that Jesus could heal him and save him. And the fact that he uses this specific example to start with the forgiveness of sins, to then prove to the Pharisees that this is how sin is forgiven, or this is how you know I have that power. This one, it's just this beautiful picture to me of who Jesus is.
And what I like in some of that also is the highlight of the impact that we can have on one another's forgiveness. And do we see my prayers as impactful to you? I know that makes us uncomfortable. I have to ask for forgiveness to be forgiven. We're not going to talk a whole bunch about that, so we're not going to go down that path. Barry can do that sometime. But do I see myself as having that responsibility? These friends saw this issue as dire. It was so dire, they picked up their friend's bed and carried him, we don't know how far. And then when they ran into a bit of a snafu, I can't even approach the house, and the house is full. Did they say, well, I guess it wasn't meant to be? No. They climbed up on top of the roof and started tearing tiles apart and lowering their friend. And so think about all the ways that they demonstrated how dire they saw this. I mean, at minimum, they sacrificed their time. But they did really, really physically taxing work. Have you ever carried something like dead weight for a mile? Can you imagine carrying 25 or 40 pounds for a mile? Trying to stay with your friends who are doing this. It's slow going. Maybe it's an hour, 2 hours this takes them. So they sacrifice their time. They do this hard, difficult, tiring work. And they just couldn't be deterred. And so do we approach bearing one another's burdens in that same way that we refuse to be deterred? Crystal, what were you going to say?
It started with the physical problem.
Yeah, so it started with a physical problem. And the way I phrase that in my notes is the most obvious need, paralysis, It needed to be cared for. Jesus also cared for the more important need. And so what I want us to remember in that is sometimes when we bear one another's burdens, we can't solve their most important need. We can't bear their most important burden, potentially. But what burden can we bear? We can't save them from their sin, but we can make it easier for them to see the love of God and appeal to Him, and maybe make other aspects of their life, service, and difficulty less burdensome, so that when they approach God, that is as easy as possible when they seek salvation. Great. What else? Anyone else see other things? David Lee?
It's easy to overlook the tearing apart the roof thing in the story. There's a lot going on in the story. But
The felony level property destruction?
yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I mean, how often do we see somebody or know somebody that's going through something and maybe choose not to do something because they don't want to risk being impolite or being overbearing in someone else's life or acting like they would be offended that we don't think they have it all together by us offering to help too much, or that's especially the case when it comes to anything financial. And if it's very, very sensitive, these people tore apart somebody's garage. That's pretty rude. It's pretty offensive. It's not very polite. But they just acknowledge need and we're willing to do what needs to be done. And there's this aspect of I don't care what people think. I'm going to do what is the right thing to do. And there's a brash aspect of bearing somebody's burdens that needs to be acknowledged.
And part of what I would say is they impose the burden carrying on others. When they tore apart a roof, they kind of voluntold someone that they were going to have some burden in there as well because they might not have a roof that night. Now these guys probably, I hope that they thought, that's something we can fix. We can fix the roof. That's an easy solution. And actually, the more we approach the burdens that we see among our brethren and say, what are the things that are easy to fix and hard to fix? And how do I help overcome the hardest things possible? And we'll fix the easier stuff when we can, like making sure we do that triage well so that we don't forego bearing someone's burden because, well, to really help them, we might break something along the way that's easily fixed. What are you going to say, Barry?
Jesus does something here that's typical of what he does all the time. He allows himself to be interrupted and takes charge of the situation and does something about it. That's hard for us. Well, I'm a little busy right now, all this, but he always evaluates somebody's needs higher than an urgency above what he was doing at the moment. I mean, he's giving a lesson. Don't interrupt him. He's giving a lesson.
We all came to hear this guy. Yeah. And so he shows a preference to the interrupter so that he can help bear that burden, solve it for them. Great. Anything else before we go on to the widow of Zarephath? Mara?
You know, Jesus has to come out sometime. They didn't just leave the guy outside. You know, sometimes we think, just wait, the problem will resolve itself. Sometimes it doesn't. And they acted like it was a lot that they did. They didn't wait around for the problem.
Yeah, I like that idea of they didn't say, well, he's going to be done eventually. Like, we can just wait. We can wait him out. Like, he's going to have to go get some food or something sometime. So as long as we just stay here long enough and take a less brash or potentially offensive route, the problem will still solve itself. And that's part of seeing our brethren's issues as dire is, do we just say that we're going to wait? Well, we'll see if they actually need help, or we'll see if things get better, or we'll talk to them on Sunday. We'll talk to them on Sunday. We'll catch up with them later. And then later and later and later, and then we never bear their burden because we're delaying it for so long. It's a great point. All right, let's look at 1 Kings chapter 17. So Elijah has been by the brook Cherith. Ravens have been bringing him food because the land is in drought. But the water runs out. The brook dries up. And so Elijah has to leave. We'll start in verse 8. Then the word of the Lord came to him, "Arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and dwell there. Behold, I have commanded a widow there to feed you." So he arose and went to Zarephath, and when he came to the gate of the city, behold, a widow was there, gathering sticks. And he called to her and said, "Bring me a little water in a vessel that I may drink." And as she was going to bring it, he called to her and said, "Bring me a morsel of bread in your hand." And she said, "As the Lord your God lives, I have nothing baked, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. And now I am gathering a couple sticks, that I may go in and prepare it for myself and for my son, that we may eat it and die." And Elijah said to her, "Do not fear, go and do as you have said. But first, make me a little cake of it and bring it to me. And afterward, make something for yourself and your son. For thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, the jar of flour shall not be spent, and the jug of oil shall not be empty, until the day that the Lord sends rain upon the earth." And she went and did as Elijah said, and she and her household ate for many days. The jar of flour was not spent, neither did the jug of oil become empty, according to the word of the Lord that he spoke by Elijah. All right, make a couple notes about what you see here about bearing the burdens of one another. While you're finishing up, I'll just say, I think there's some cultural things that maybe are different. Now, this is really similar when Jesus is at the well and he tells the woman to draw water for him. Elijah walks into this city and tells this woman, "Hey, go get me some water." And then he yells after her, "Hey, go give me some bread too." I don't recommend we do that. I'm just going to point that out. Like, if you go to someone's house, maybe don't start out this way. Just to that's not something to emulate in the story. Just to be clear, maybe not yet. All right, what do you see about bearing each other's burdens here?
And the miraculous part's a little hard.
The miraculous part may be a little hard to do, but is it? I'd actually encourage you that in the story we should think about the miraculous aspect here and question how much that applies to us. When we see the financial needs of others, how often would we consider literally using the last piece of bread that we have for our family and giving it to someone else? In our class this morning in the Good Samaritan, one of the discussions we had, Nicole kind of instigated some of this comment that a couple of us made around the idea that the Lord is requiring us to be radical in how we consider helping each other. And this widow, when she gives her last bit of bread, even though she's been given the promise that the Lord will provide, that's still pretty radical. Because it involves a level of trust that says, I will give you this bread. And as a parent, I struggle to imagine this. I will give you this bread, and I won't give it to my son. Do we trust that much in the Lord? Do we trust that when we read passages like in Psalms that we've never seen the righteous begging bread, that the Lord will provide if we provide for another? You know, 2 Corinthians 8 talks about the Macedonians and how they gave so fully. And one of the things that I love in that passage is he references that when you have excess, when I have excess, I give to you. That is what I'm to do. And one day when I have lack, you will have excess. And then you can share with me. And in that way, all will be provided for and none will lack. That idea of relationship and bearing each other's burdens so fully that we would consider sharing our last bite of bread with another, trusting that God will give us the bite after that. That's radical. And I would encourage us that in Galatians 6, the focus is not physical things. Maybe in 1 Thessalonians 5 it's not either, but certainly in Galatians 6, the focus is spiritual. And that we should think about this in the same way. That there are times when I am exceptionally weak. You know, we're all weak in the flesh just on average, but at times we all struggle more than others. And at times we are stronger than we are on average. And if we think about this concept of sharing when we have excess and accepting when we have lack so that none will lack and all will be provided for, it applies spiritually as well. That when my brother is weak, if I have excess and I share with him and strengthen him and build him up, in the future, he will still be faithful because I helped him through his trial. And if he's still faithful, what can he do for me later when I am struggling with a burden? He can help me, and that way I won't lack later. But if we hoard our riches, our spiritual riches, when we are blessed abundantly to feel secure in our faith and to trust in the Lord as we should, and we never share that out with others, well, that's the way eventually everyone ends up not being supported, because we'll slowly wither and die. The communal aspect of our service together and bearing one another's burdens is that if I help you now, you can help me later, or you can help someone else later. That is a benefit. That's why the body is here, so that we can do that. What else do we see about the widow of Zarephath? Crystal?
I think this goes a little further than that. She didn't have it since she was going to die. So, did she have those?
She was not sharing her excess. She went from very little to none and trusted the Lord to provide the rest. That's a great point. Megan?
I think another important aspect of this story is that Elijah asked. A lot of times we don't ask, especially when it's spiritual. I think we're almost ashamed and embarrassed to ask.
So that's one of the things I have written down, and that I think often when we talk about sharing and bearing one another's burdens, in some ways rightfully, we put the burden of that on the provider. That Adam, if you have excess, or to Crystal's point, maybe not just when you have excess, it is my responsibility to share. As the provider of resources, I'm the one who has the onus to provide and to share. But I think this example from Elijah does show us that we have the right to demand that help from one another. Do you feel comfortable with that? Like, would you feel comfortable spiritually demanding spiritual help from your brethren? I mean, I hope you would. That's the idea. We're supposed to feel that confident in our relationship with each other. But do we? Do we go to one another and say, I'm struggling with sin and I need your help now. I don't really care what else you're doing. I have never done that. I should have done that, but I don't think I've ever done that. I have a feeling for many of us it's the same. That despite the presence of need, we certainly often haven't felt comfortable sheepishly asking for help, much less demanding it. In order for help to be provided when it's needed, we need to know about the need. And so, if you are struggling, but you're not telling anyone, I hope you're not holding them accountable for not helping you. I mean, they have a responsibility to figure out that you need help, but you certainly don't have a place to hold them responsible or accountable if you aren't seeking to provide that information for them. Anything else from here with the widow? I kind of said this, but I will say it again. That because she provided for Elijah, she and her son survived the famine. Have you considered what would have happened if she'd said, no, we're going to eat this and then we're going to die? That's the path we choose. And Elijah said, like, I just told you that the Lord would take care of that. And she's like, I don't know if I trust you. We're just going to eat this. What'd you say?
I don't even know.
Yeah, I don't. You just came into town, buddy. Like, you're not even from here. But instead, because she gave her last, the Lord gave her plenty. I think that's a hard lesson for us to be comfortable with. Teresa?
The beginning of that text says that God expanded the past, but she never mentions that.
Yeah, I had that in my notes too. I've wondered about that when the Lord says, I've commanded her, if she just ignored that or if there's some aspect to the Lord knows that it will come to pass, and so he's saying that that's commanded. That part's kind of puzzling to me in general. Did she get commanded, but she doesn't mention it? I don't know. But we're commanded. We all know that we're commanded. So we don't have that potential gray area of was it clear or was it not clear? It is clear for us. We're going to skip the Good Samaritan. I do want us to spend a little bit of time, I know we're running short, looking at this last question on your page. And that is, what are the practical issues with serving each other in these ways? And how do we overcome them? Take just a minute and write a few things down. What do you see as the practical issues that impede helping each other in these ways? Time. Fundamentally, our most precious resource is time. Any way that we're going to help anyone will require some level of time. There's no way to do it where it doesn't. Mark?
We have to be okay with the possibility that it may not go the right way. I say that because people are flawed. We help in the wrong ways. We may say the wrong things. We may think we're helping when we're actually hurting a little bit. And that, I believe that's when 1 Corinthians 13 comes in, when it says, believes all things. You have to believe that their intentions are good and that sometimes you might be hurt. But it's better to say that you need help than to keep it inside.
And I would also add that in James 1, we're told that the Lord will bless us in our doing. The Lord doesn't bless us when we sit by and do nothing. He doesn't improve our nothingness when we just don't do anything. That the Lord will bless us in our doing. So yes, there is great risk that providing help or asking for help will get messy. Messy is what I had in my notes. There's lots of reasons it can be messy. But that when I ask for help, the Lord will bless me in my asking. That when I seek to provide help, the Lord will bless me in my providing. The Lord can't bless us if we don't do anything. He can't help on either side of that equation if we sit by idly and do nothing. Great. Wayne?
In the business world, you'll be familiar with the term paralysis by analysis.
Yes.
You don't want to just sit there. You just have to make a move. The natural reaction to a problem is to sit there and stew over it. Where just getting started sometimes is a big deal.
Yeah. Being paralyzed by considering too much means we don't do anything. Michael?
I think we got to get over the side of letting situations that are manageable go hard. Like, I think when we always bring point of like, I can't do this by myself, I have to have help now. But I think a lot of times we have situations in life where it's like, I can do this on my own, it's just going to be really stinking hard. So I'm going to put my pride first and just let it be really hard. In those times when it's manageable, having the humility to still say like, I could do this by myself, but it would be a whole lot easier if I could get some help.
Yeah, so to me, that's in the category of looking at this from the side of the one who has need. That, again, I have a responsibility that I can ask. I need to ask for help. And that if I wait until the issue is absolutely terrible, well, that also means that it's even harder to provide help. And then if instead we looked sometimes and said, hey, my issue is not super dire yet, will you help me prevent it from becoming that way? Like, we could avert crisis in our faith more often if we were willing to engage before there was a crisis of faith, when there's just like a little concern of faith. A couple that I'll just go through in my notes. One is being willing to serve radically and sacrifice radically for each other. What does that look like? How much time in your week are you spending sacrificing for others? If you don't see anyone outside of these four walls between Sunday and Wednesday, you likely are going to struggle to do this. Just full stop. If you only see your brethren here, you will struggle to bear each other's burdens. I also think that a lot of us struggle with faux humility, and that is, I don't have anything to offer. How could I help? Like, how could I help someone else? Either they're better, they're stronger, or I'm weak, or whatever. Do you believe that Christ died for you? Most of you nodded your head in a positive way. Good. If you didn't, do so now. I'll make this a lot easier. Great. If you believe that Christ died for you, that means either you have value because the Son of God died for you, or you believe that Christ had no value. So which do you believe? Do you believe that Christ, the Son of God, had value and he sacrificed it for you? Because if you do believe that, that fundamentally believes that you have value and you have things to offer to the kingdom. So don't put on a shroud of humility that says, well, I don't have enough to offer. The Lord thought you had enough to offer that he died for you. So don't hide behind that belief that maybe you don't have enough or your service is too meager. The last thing I'll say as an urge for all of us is I've talked about a lot about the side on the providers of aid. But I would encourage all of us to think about we will all need help at some point. If you don't think that, go listen to Barry's sermon from last Sunday evening, I think. Morning, sorry. At least I remembered this sermon. Go listen to that lesson about how each of us will be tested in our lives multiple times. So if you haven't faced this yet, you will face it. Just trust in that. So what I would encourage each of us to do from an active future needer of help is to think of ways that would make getting help easier. This goes to the point that Michael and I were talking about a minute ago, that sometimes we may wait until things are so dire that it's difficult to get help and get aid. Can I make decisions today that will make future help easier? That looks like spending time with people today. That when someone asks you to be in their life today, that you aren't always too busy to do that. And that if you are too busy to build relationships with your brethren, you start to recognize that and you change the priorities in your life. Because if you want help from the people in this room in the future, you're going to have to know the people in this room. And if you don't, and you've made choices that have led you to that place, you can unmake those choices. You can make different ones. The second is, don't reject relationships when they come to you. When you see someone here that walks up and talks to you, they are seeking relationship. So don't just say, oh, it's nice that they said hello to me, and then you're out the door, and then 3 months later when that person says hello to you, that you go, oh, it's nice that they said hello again. Those interactions are requests for relationship. Look at them as opportunities and look at them as requests from your brethren to form that relationship for help. And then think about this a little bit the way Alcoholics Anonymous does. Everybody needs a sponsor. If you aren't familiar with AA, I would actually encourage all Christians to be familiar with AA. There's a ton of fantastic principles within AA for both evangelism and also support of each other. Sadly, I know more about AA than I would prefer because of my brother. But every member of AA has a sponsor. That sponsor is someone who holds them accountable. That sponsor is someone that's not directly related to them. Spouses can't be sponsors. Significant others can't be sponsors. If you have a sponsor that becomes your significant other, the rules of AA force you to change who your sponsor is because they recognize that that is not a healthy relationship to help you in that way. Everybody needs one. Everybody gets one. It's a requirement. It's not a choice. And so that this last urging is, who is your sponsor? Hopefully someone here you would say is a sponsor in some ways, a mentor, a carer of you. They might be a brother or sister from outside this building as well. I'm not saying that's bad. But you need to inspect who is your sponsor. Who would you go to, and are you going to them now? Or do you just plan to go to them in the future if something comes up? Or are you building that relationship now so that they can aid you? And then remember that you have responsibility as well. Who are you sponsoring? Who do you provide that sort of hope and relationship and care for? And see that as a responsibility of being a part of the family of God. Thank you so much for the time tonight to talk about bearing each other's burdens. I'm really glad this year that we've been able to talk more about practical applications of love in the Lord's church. I don't know what our theme is next year. I think the elders will tell us that soon. And we'll have quarterly studies again next year, and I or another man will do these as we've become accustomed to. It's been a joy to study with you. We have been blessed to have this group bear our burdens. We seek to bear yours. If we can help you in any way, please come forward as we stand and sing.